Heating our homes is a significant proportion of the energy that we expend in the UK. As this image shows, homes can have weak points where doors, windows, walls, roofs and floors provide escape routes for the energy that we do expend. In the early 1970s, our domestic energy use was about 36 to 37 million tonnes of oil equivalent, or TOEs, and a third of which came from coal. Our consumption peaked around 2010 at about 49 million TOE, but by then the mix was mostly natural gas, about 2/3. Now the mix between fuels is similar, and the present energy use, 41 million tonnes, is slightly less than it was in 1995. But our cumulative emission just keeps rising. Virtually all the CO2 evolved over this period of time is still in the atmosphere and the oceans. How can we turn the corner so that our cumulative emissions start to fall? For that we need to reach net zero or net negative in our CO2e, that is the emissions from all types normalized to carbon dioxide. Is that possible from domestic use? Can we move from the red curve here to the blue one? Of our four sectors, transport and domestic expend the most energy. That is very different from 1970 because since then the energy use for transport has doubled, and within that time industry has dropped to about a third. In this particular video we concentrate on domestic energy, and that gives us a clear location that some of us might be able to influence. But not everyone has control over their own abode. Should we plant more trees to soak up the CO2? Or should we do something to reduce the emissions to net zero or beyond? The mix of energy is pretty stark. It is dominated by natural gas, and electricity is the minor partner. All of the other sources combined produce less than the electricity. And of those, bioenergy and waste is rising, but the liquid fossil fuels is dropping. At home, we have contributed in a tiny way to this trend. We are not on the gas grid, but have removed our heating oil tank and have gone essentially all electric. To make the numbers more tangible, here is the average consumption of gas and electricity per household in 2019. 12,100 kilowatt hours for gas and 3,800 for electricity. That works out about 1.8 kilowatts continuously. A couple of useful rules of thumb are, firstly, that once established, a tree fixes about 21 or 22 kilograms of CO2 per year on average. And secondly, that over a 100-year lifetime cycle, a tree will fix about 1 ton of CO2 in total. If we convert the consumption of gas and electricity to the CO2 released, along with the heat energy we want, we can see the equivalent number of trees required to offset this emission. That's about 4 trees. It means that you are likely to have to plant a very similar number of trees each year, and that is for each household in the United Kingdom, of which there are about 28 million. So that's about 112 million trees per year. Now, for an air-to-water heat pump, electricity replaces gas for heating domestic hot water and the central heating system through radiators and/or underfloor networks. Our own case was different. We replaced a heating oil-driven boiler, but in principle all this fossil fuel is replaced by electricity. But the heat pump means that the electrical energy required is considerably reduced. Presently this month, our system is estimated to have consumed 47 kilowatt hours of electricity and relayed 123 kilowatt hours of heat to the water, a factor of 2.6. And this is represented in the plot here by an increase in electricity demand at the expense of all the gas. Using a factor slightly more conservative of about 2.5. Here is the monthly output of a 14-panel solar panel system throughout 2020. It is on a south-facing roof of a church hall in the south of England and provides a pretty favourable installation site. Overall, that has provided just over 4 megawatt hours of electricity in the year. As expected, the yield is much lower in the winter months, but this reasonably represents what is possible with a largish domestic unit. The bulk of the solar panel generation is used to offset net electricity use over the year. But in addition, a device called a diverter can make this photovoltaic source the first option for heating a water tank, so that can also reduce the necessary use of heating by gas. Continuing with this example, the 12,100 kilowatt hours of gas consumption could be reduced to zero and the electricity consumption left with little change. And the effect of this would be a reduction of the number of the overall CO2 emissions from 4 tonnes to 1 tonne, so reducing the burden of tree planting by a factor of 4. All of this assumes no attempt at reducing the need for home heating. That can be achieved in part by reducing the room temperature. However, for people with imperfect health, that can be problematic. These are examples of carbon savings under UK schemes, as reported in 2019. Many of those address wall insulation and loft insulation, and there are large benefits if these are carried out appropriately and well. For us, as we have no loft and the house was not that old, these were of little benefit. But replacing ill-fitting double glazing with high specification ones with lower leak rates made a very large difference. It also reduces the external noise greatly. We do have a coal or wood fire in the living room, but it has become an ornament since that work was done. We did also have a new boiler of larger capacity for the heat pump, and that also improved the efficiency. Why then is it that more of these lines are not being done to reduce our carbon emissions, those associated with our domestic heating? This paragraph here explains it well. In terms of heat pumps, awareness and understanding is low. They are more complicated than heating a big bucket of water, but once set up, they merge into the background with little hassle. There are financial implications. The upfront costs are higher for the pump compared to a boiler. And if you need a new hot water tank, that may significantly need more space, and that might not be available. Air-to-air heat pumps are less space demanding. A central heating system might be challenged to have to cope with lower water temperatures. Our mitigation for this was to improve the insulation. The disruption effect has not been much of a problem for us during a summer breakdown at least. The water tanks should have an immersion heater anyway, which is required once a week to take the water to about 60 degrees centigrade to suppress the buildup of Legionella. So that means naturally we have a backup water heater. Finding a trusted installer with the right skills is very important. This is our second installation, and it was rather easier to do this time than the last, but it's not an entirely solved problem. It is great that in a proportion of homes you can replace gas with a lower consumption of electricity with a heat pump. But the UK is one of the countries in Europe with the highest electricity to gas price ratio. Other countries, Netherlands, Sweden, France, Italy, Portugal, have a much different price pattern. This will be a big factor in throttling heat pump installations. The carbon footprint of our electricity varies with the region, and that informs how things might change in future. Let us track north from where we live in central southern England. At tea time a couple of days ago, the carbon intensity of our electricity was said to be high. That was 290 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. The major source was gas, with significant components come from solar generation and imported electricity from across the Channel. The UK is a net energy importer. In the West Midlands, the carbon intensity was rated as very high, over 360 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. In addition to gas as the principal source and some solar, there was also significant use of coal. Now, if you go up to southern Scotland, the carbon intensity is very low. It's dropped from 366 to 3. The main source here is nuclear, and virtually all the rest is from wind power. And in the north of Scotland, in that region, the carbon intensity goes to 0. Yay! There is still a little nuclear, but the majority is wind power, and the bulk of the remainder is hydroelectric. This shows a trend that regions can take steps along which is appropriate for them, so that the national carbon intensity of electricity can be reduced still further, and so the carbon footprint of our home heating reduced also. This is all tantalizing but frustrating. Taking packages of all these measures, we can decarbonise our home heating without making the need to plant swathes of trees. We can understand our houses more easily now with thermal imaging. We can have cameras on our smartphones and work out what the priorities are for insulation and ventilation. We have technologies available to make deep inroads into the energy we consume in our houses, and we also have the technology to go further down the road of decarbonisation of our electricity. Planning for training, installation, and the fiscal structures are all needed to set this into motion. Then we can much reduce the risk of inappropriate tree planting to store carbon for a few decades. Rather, through rewilding and judicious nature conservation, as in our nearby Hants and Alavoid Wildlife Trust, to tackle something of that other crisis of species diversity and also store carbon sustainably.